$250,000. That's how much I gave my daughter from the sale of my bistro, the culmination of my life's work, so she could buy her dream cottage by the sea. 3 months later, she was screaming at me, "Get out of my house!" I walked away with a calm smile because I knew a storm was coming for them, and I would be the one to orchestrate it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Yes, $250,000. That was the exact amount I gave my daughter, Chloe, so she could buy the seaside home she'd always fantasized about. And just 90 days later, her gratitude had curdled into rage. I left smiling. She didn't know I was already simmering with a plan for revenge. The living room still smelled of sea salt and new beginnings. Chloe stood rigidly by the stone fireplace, her face flushed with a fury that clashed with the tranquil ocean view from the large picture window. Her husband, Leo, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a familiar, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. The artisanal ceramic mug I'd been holding lay shattered on the wide plank pine floor, dark coffee spreading like a coastal marsh tide. "Dad, your part in this is over." Chloe's voice was as sharp as a shard of sea glass. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I stood frozen, the scene surreal. The framed photo on the mantel, from a sailing trip last summer where we all looked so happy, seemed to mock me now. The proceeds from my bistro, my sacrifice, my dreams of cooking family meals, and hearing grandchildren's laughter in this very house, all of it was dissolving in real time. "This is our home now," Leo added, his tone casual, almost bored. "Your place is elsewhere." The deed to the cottage sat on the driftwood coffee table, Chloe's signature scrawled boldly across it. My $250,000 had bought her this moment of power. She gestured at it with a flick of her wrist, her designer watch catching the light. "But you promised," I said quietly, remembering that day at the credit union when she'd cried tears of joy. "You said we'd be a family, that I'd have a place here." Chloe's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Things change, Dad. We need our space. You understand, don't you?" The scent of the new wool rug mixed with the acrid smell of betrayal. I looked around the room I'd made possible, the minimalist Scandinavian furniture, the state-of-the-art sound system, the chef's kitchen visible through the archway. Every dollar had come from the sale of my restaurant, from decades of 16-hour days and careful saving. I walked to the coat rack by the door, my movements deliberate and calm. The smooth wooden pegs were empty, save for my worn peacoat. Behind me, I heard Leo whisper something to Chloe, followed by her stifled giggle. "Where will you go?" Chloe asked, though her tone suggested she didn't really care. I turned to face them both, my smile forming slowly. It wasn't the smile of a defeated old man. It was something else entirely. Something that made Leo shift uncomfortably, and Chloe's laughter die in her throat. "I'll figure it out," I said, my voice steady. "I always do." The front door, the one I'd paid to have replaced with solid teak to withstand the coastal storms, closed behind me with a soft click. The October evening in Portland, Maine, carried the first hint of a nor'easter's chill. Lighthouses blinked in the distance. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the crisp, salty air. A neighbor's window flickered with warm light, and I could hear the distant foghorn on the bay. The gravel driveway stretched before me, leading to my old Volvo station wagon, parked at the curb. As I walked to my car, a memory stirred. Something about that day at the credit union, about Chloe's eyes when she'd hugged me after the transaction. There had been a flicker of something that didn't match her tears of gratitude. I climbed into the driver's seat, the worn leather cool against my back. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble. In the rearview mirror, I could see the cottage glowing with warm light. My cottage, bought with my money, now closed to me forever. But as I drove through the darkening coastal roads, toward a budget motel on the edge of the city, that smile never left my face. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The motel room smelled of disinfectant and damp sea air. I set my single duffel bag on the bed and pulled out my wallet, thick with old receipts and faded photos. Among them was the bank slip from 6 months ago. $250,000 withdrawal, signed in my careful handwriting. I sat on the edge of the bed, the document trembling slightly in my hands. The memory crashed over me like a wave. The Atlantic Federal Credit Union had been busy that Tuesday morning. The teller, a young man with kind eyes, had processed the withdrawal with professional efficiency. Chloe sat beside me, her hand on my arm, her voice soft with emotion. "Dad, I can't believe you're doing this for us," she'd whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This cottage, it's everything we dreamed of." I'd handed over the cashier's check, watching her eyes light up with joy. 250,000. The entire profit from selling my beloved bistro, minus a small amount I'd kept for basic expenses. 30 years of creating menus, managing staff, and sweating over a hot stove, all of it condensed into one piece of paper. "We'll live together as a family forever," Chloe had promised, clutching the check to her chest. "Leo and I have already talked about it. You'll have your own suite with a kitchenette. We'll be together. Sunday clam bakes, holiday feasts, everything." The credit union had hummed with activity around us. I'd signed the papers with steady hands, thinking of my late wife, Eleanor, wondering if she'd approve of this gesture. "Dad, you're the most generous man I know," Chloe had said, her embrace warm and genuine. "We'll take care of you, I promise." Now, in this sterile motel room, I set the receipt aside and reached for my phone. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. I ignored them and opened my banking app, scrolling through recent transactions. That's when I saw it. A small discrepancy I'd missed before. A transfer from Chloe's account to an unknown recipient, dated just 2 days after the cottage purchase. The amount was substantial enough to catch my attention. Rain began pattering against the window, each drop echoing the growing doubt in my mind. I pulled out another document from my wallet, the original property listing Chloe had shown me months ago. The asking price had been $220,000, not the $250,000 I'd provided. I stood and walked to the window, watching the droplets race down the glass. The parking lot below was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered under the dim streetlights. In the distance, the lights of Portland twinkled like fallen stars. That celebration dinner at the Gilded Lobster came flooding back. Leo had ordered the most expensive champagne, his voice loud and cheerful. "To family," he'd toasted, raising his glass. "To new beginnings." Chloe had glowed with happiness, her hand resting on mine across the table. "Dad, you've given us everything. The cottage, the stability, the future. We'll never forget this." But there had been something in Leo's expression, a satisfied smirk that didn't quite match his grateful words. And Chloe's eyes, when she thought I wasn't looking, had held a calculating gleam that should have warned me. Leo had said casually, prying open an oyster. "Chloe and I were thinking about maybe starting a little business, something that really fits our lifestyle." "Of course," I'd replied, not understanding then what I was agreeing to. "Whatever makes you happy." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Dubois, this is regarding your recent financial transaction. Please call us at your earliest convenience." I stared at the message, my smile returning. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the window, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the lonely cry of a buoy bell out on the water. I sat back down on the bed, the bank papers scattered around me like ingredients for a dish I was finally beginning to understand. The fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows across the room. Tomorrow, I would make some calls. Tonight, I would remember every detail of their promises, every word of their gratitude, every moment of their deception. Because Chloe and Leo had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that a quiet, generous old chef would simply disappear when dismissed. They had no idea that 30 years in the kitchen had taught me that the best dishes, especially revenge, are served cold. As rain tapped the motel window, I set the phone aside and drew out a snapshot from my wallet. The cottage looked so perfect in the photo. Weathered gray shingles, a widow's walk, a green lawn stretching toward the rocky shore. Chloe had taken this picture the day we got the keys. November had been crisp and golden in Portland. The moving truck arrived at dawn, its diesel engine rumbling in the quiet coastal lane. Chloe stood on the front porch, her face glowing with excitement, while Leo directed the movers with theatrical gestures. "This is our dream, Dad," Chloe had exclaimed. throwing her arms around me as we watched our combined belongings disappear into the cottage. Everything we ever wanted. I'd carried box after box from my old apartment cookbooks, photos of Eleanor, my culinary awards, the small accumulation of a lifetime. The cottage swallowed them easily, rooms spacious enough to hold our separate lives and shared hopes. The living room had seemed enormous that first day. We'd arranged furniture under the big bay window that looked out toward the churning Atlantic. Chloe hummed while she worked, occasionally stopping to squeeze my hand or show me where she planned to hang family photos. "Here," she'd said, pointing to the mantel above the fireplace. "Your James Beard nomination certificate goes right here where everyone can see it." Leo had been helpful, too, in those early days. "Arthur, where do you want your reading chair?" he'd asked, genuine warmth in his voice. "We want you to have the best spot for watching the storms roll in." The first weeks had flowed like warm honey. Sunday morning blueberry pancakes in the bright kitchen, evening walks along the cliff path as the autumn leaves turned fiery. Chloe would link her arm through mine, chattering about her plans for an herb garden, while Leo discussed local politics and fishing reports. But tension built slowly, like pressure in a steam cooker. It started with small things, the heating oil bill arriving in December, higher than expected because of the old cottage. Leo had frowned over the invoice one evening, his calculator clicking repetitively. "Geez, Arthur," he'd muttered, not quite under his breath. "You keep the thermostat pretty high for one person." "I can cover the extra," I'd offered immediately, "whatever it costs." Chloe had looked up from her tablet, something unreadable flickering across her face. "That's not the point, Dad. We just need to be more conscious." The ocean views from the kitchen window had seemed less spectacular after that conversation. I found myself counting the minutes I spent in each room, turning down the heat even when I was cold. Christmas dinner had been strained. I'd volunteered to roast the goose the way Eleanor used to, but Chloe intercepted with forced cheerfulness. "Oh no, Dad. This is our kitchen now. You just relax and let us handle everything." So I'd sat in the living room, listening to muffled conversations and the clatter of pots, feeling like a guest in a cottage I'd paid for. When Leo emerged to grab another craft beer, he'd paused by my chair. "You know, Arthur, Chloe and I have been talking about space, about independence. We're thinking maybe it's time we all had our own places again." The suggestion had hung in the air like fog. I'd nodded politely, but something cold had settled in my chest. "Of course," I'd replied, "whatever you think is best." But that night, lying in the guest bedroom that was supposed to be my permanent home, I'd stared at the ceiling and wondered when everything had changed. Now in the motel room, I folded the photograph carefully and slipped it back into my wallet. The rain had stopped, leaving only the sound of distant surf and the hum of the heater. My phone buzzed again. Another message from that unknown number. I picked it up, this time reading the full text. "Mr. Dubois, regarding your daughter's financial activity, we have questions about recent transactions that may require investigation. The lighthouses were invisible in the darkness beyond my window, but I knew they were there. Steady, permanent, unmoved by the small betrayals of small people. I was beginning to understand that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. That uneasy quiet from Christmas stretched into the days ahead, pulling me deeper into recollection. As January settled over Portland with its first serious blizzard, the cottage had transformed from a home into a battlefield of polite aggression. The mornings were the worst. I'd wake early, as I always did, and pad to the kitchen to make coffee. The routine had become a careful dance of avoidance, timing my movements to miss theirs, cleaning up immediately, so no trace of my presence remained. "Morning, Dad," Chloe would say when she finally appeared, but her smile never reached her eyes anymore. She'd pour herself coffee from the pot I'd made, then immediately start wiping down counters I'd already cleaned. Leo was less subtle. He'd lumber into the kitchen in his expensive robe, grunting something that might have been a greeting, then stand pointedly by the espresso machine until I moved away. "Arthur, maybe you could start making your coffee with the French press," he'd suggested one gray Tuesday morning. "Seems wasteful to fire up the big machine for just one person." The comment had hit like a small slap. One person. As if Chloe and he weren't benefiting from my early rising, my careful preparations. Of course, I'd said, measuring my voice carefully. I'll keep that in mind. The dinner table became a study in strategic seating, where once we gathered naturally, now they sat together on one side, while I faced them alone. Conversations floated around me like water around a stone. Discussions of their plans, their friends, their future, that somehow never included references to our shared living arrangement. We're thinking of getting a membership at the yacht club, Chloe had announced one evening, cutting her salmon into precise pieces. Leo knows someone who can sponsor us. That sounds lovely, I'd replied, though the membership fees alone would cost more than my monthly pension. It's really more for couples, Leo had added with a shrug. You understand. Silence fell. The sound of cutlery against plates seemed unnaturally loud. I started eating my meals earlier, claiming I wasn't hungry when they sat down for dinner. It was easier than watching them exchange glances over my head. Easier than pretending their obvious hints weren't landing exactly where intended. The spare bedroom, my bedroom, had developed a chill that no amount of extra heating seemed to touch. I'd taken to wearing sweaters indoors, wrapping myself in blankets while reading, though the thermostat read a comfortable 70 degrees. Dad, maybe you should see a doctor, Chloe had suggested, finding me bundled on the couch one evening. You seem cold all the time. Her concern might have been genuine, but I'd caught her exchanging a look with Leo. A look that said, old man, falling apart, burden. I'm fine, I'd assured her, just adjusting to the climate. But the real cold wasn't coming from outside. Valentine's Day preparations had begun without me. I'd offered to help with decorations, to contribute to gift buying, to cook my traditional romantic dinner. Each offer was politely declined. We want to do things our way this year, Chloe had explained, not meeting my eyes. Start our own traditions, you know. Our own traditions. In the cottage I'd bought for us to share. I'd taken to spending evenings in my room, door closed, reading cookbooks and listening to the muffled sounds of their life continuing without me. Sometimes I heard laughter from downstairs, warm and spontaneous, and the kind that died immediately when I appeared. The untouched tea growing cold on my nightstand had become a symbol of everything wrong. I'd make it each evening, intending to drink it while reading. Then forget it entirely, as my mind wandered to escape roots and contingency plans. Their anniversary in March had been the breaking point. They'd made reservations at an expensive restaurant in Kennebunkport, mentioning it casually as if I'd naturally understand I wasn't included. You don't really like crowds anyway, Dad, Chloe had said, fastening an earring in the hallway mirror. You'll be more comfortable here. Much more comfortable, Leo had echoed, straightening his designer watch. I'd watched them leave from the living room window all dressed up and laughing as they climbed into the car I'd helped them afford. The cottage had felt enormous around me, every room echoing with the sound of my own breathing. Now, back in the motel room, I understood that those final weeks had been a slow-motion eviction notice. They'd been training me to be absent, to take up less space, to need less attention. They'd been preparing me for exile, but they'd made one critical error in their calculations. They'd assumed that making me unwelcome would make me disappear quietly. What they didn't realize was that they'd given me time to think, time to plan, time to remember exactly how much I'd sacrificed and exactly how little I was willing to accept in return. My phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. With those memories weighing heavy, I settled into the motel routine, pulling out papers from my bag. The plastic hotel keycard sat on the nightstand, a reminder of how far I'd fallen from family patriarch to exile. But exile, I was learning, had its advantages. I spread my documents across the thin bedspread. Bank statements, the cottage deed copy, insurance papers, and that mysterious phone number that had been haunting me all evening. The overhead light buzzed like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across the financial trail of my generosity. The first call came at 8 a.m. Mr. Dubois, this is Patricia Chen from Atlantic Federal's Fraud Department. Her voice carried professional concern. We've detected some unusual activity on accounts associated with your name. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of activity? Sir, it appears a business loan application was submitted using your social security number and signature for $75,000. Secured against the property at 112 Ocean Point Lane. Fraud. The word hit me like a physical blow. I never applied for any loan, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. The signature appears to match yours, Mr. Dubois. Do you have any family members with access to your personal information? I closed my eyes, pieces clicking into place like a recipe I'd been too trusting to see. Yes, my daughter and her husband. I see. We'll need you to come in today to verify these documents. This is a serious matter, Mr. Dubois. If fraud has occurred, we're looking at federal charges. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the papers scattered before me. The bank statement I'd glimpsed yesterday now made perfect sense. That mysterious transfer timed perfectly with the loan approval. They hadn't just taken my gift. They'd stolen my identity to steal even more. I pulled out my reading glasses and examined the cottage purchase documents with a chef's precision. There, buried in the fine print, was a loan rider I'd never seen before. The application, supposedly signed by me, requested additional funds for seed capital for a new consulting business. My signature looked perfect. Too perfect. I paced the small room, phone clutched in my hand, calling every number I could remember. The insurance agent confirmed additional liability coverage had been purchased in my name. The title company verified a second lien had been filed. When did you say this was processed? I asked the title clerk, a young man who sounded bored. November 20th, sir. Standard procedure. Your daughter brought in all the paperwork. Said you were feeling under the weather. November 20th. I'd been healthy as a horse, helping them hang pictures in the living room while they processed paperwork to rob me. The motel room's single window faced the parking lot where a few cars sat scattered like abandoned hopes. I watched a maintenance worker empty trash bins, his movements methodical and unhurried. Everything in this world continued its normal rhythm, while my life cracked open like an egg. A knock at the door interrupted my fury. Mr. Dubois? A crisp voice, unfamiliar. Got a minute to chat? I opened the door to find an elderly woman in a practical windbreaker, her face weathered by decades of Maine winters. She held a pair of binoculars and offered a cautious smile. Name's Eleanor Albright. Live next door. She gestured toward the adjacent room. Couldn't help but notice you've been making some intense phone calls. Everything all right? Something in her manner, the careful way she spoke, the knowing look in her eyes, suggested this wasn't a casual neighbor check. Just sorting through some family business, I replied. Ms. Albright nodded slowly. Family business can be tricky, especially when it involves that cottage on Ocean Point Lane. I stared at her. You know about the cottage? Son, I know about a lot of things. Been watching that property for months. Noticed some interesting visitors lately. People asking questions they probably shouldn't be asking. She pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket. A surveyor's preliminary report, dated just weeks ago. Found this blowing around the neighborhood yesterday. Figured you might want to see it, considering you're the real owner and all. The report was brief, but damning. Significant soil erosion, potential foundation instability due to water runoff. Recommended further geotechnical investigation before final approval. How did you... I started. The word travels fast in small neighborhoods, Mr. Dubois, especially when people start bragging about pulling fast ones on family. Ms. Albright's eyes hardened. Some of us old-timers don't appreciate that kind of behavior. I stared at the report, my hands shaking slightly. Not from fear this time, but from something much more powerful. That puzzling report propelled me out into the crisp morning, heading toward familiar streets. Ms. Albright's information had given me the first weapon in what was becoming a very interesting war. I drove slowly through the subdivision, my Volvo purring quietly along the winding coastal roads. April had stripped most leaves from the branches, leaving the neighborhood looking stark and honest. No more autumn disguises, just bare truth exposed to the salty air. The cottage looked different in daylight, somehow smaller than I remembered. I parked 3 blocks away and walked back, keeping to the opposite side of the street. A jogger passed me, earbuds in, lost in her own world. A dog walker nodded politely. A normal seaside morning, hiding extraordinary deception. From across the street, I could see what the surveyor had noted. The ground near the cottage's east wall sloped more steeply than it should, a sign of erosion. The stone patio sat slightly askew, settling unevenly into soil that had probably never been properly graded. Terrible shame about that runoff. I turned to find an older man trimming a hedge in the yard behind me. He wore gardening gloves and a knowing expression. "Excuse me, the water runoff on that property," he pointed with his shears. "Been watching it wash out the soil since they built it. Previous owners tried to hide it with a fancy retaining wall, but you can't fool Mother Nature." He introduced himself as Mr. Peterson, a 30-year resident of the neighborhood. His words came with the authority of someone who'd watched every drama unfold from his kitchen window. No, the builder cut corners, you see. Didn't properly grade the lot, used cheaper fill than specified. Inspector was supposed to catch it, but he shrugged meaningfully. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I was beginning to guess. Bad enough that the previous owners couldn't get flood insurance without disclosing it. Bad enough that 3 potential buyers walked away once they hired proper engineers. My heart started beating faster. But the sale went through. "Oh, yes," Mr. Peterson said, his tone dripping with disapproval. "Someone managed to get it past the cursory inspection. Probably helped that the buyer's family was so eager, so trusting. Some people take advantage of that kind of trust." I thanked him and walked back to my car, mind spinning with possibilities. By noon, I was sitting in a coffee shop downtown, the Foggy Bean, laptop open, researching Maine's real estate disclosure laws. The legal requirements were crystal clear. Sellers must disclose known defects, especially foundation and erosion problems. The previous owners had known. The real estate agent had to have known. Someone had deliberately hidden information that would have changed everything. My phone rang, a known number. "Mr. Dubois, this is Janet Morrison from Coastal Geotechnical Solutions. I understand you're inquiring about a soil stability inspection at 112 Ocean Point Lane." I hadn't called any inspection company, but I played along. "That's right. Sir, I have to tell you, we did a preliminary assessment of that property 6 months ago. The current owners contacted us about remediation costs." Her voice carried professional concern. "The estimates were substantial." "How substantial?" "Minimum $50,000 for emergency grading and a new retaining wall. Full repair, including foundation underpinning, would run closer to $90,000. The cottage isn't safe for long-term occupancy without immediate intervention." After hanging up, I sat in the coffee shop, watching steam rise from my untouched cup. The ingredients of their deception were falling into place like a perfectly executed recipe. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd stuck me with the cottage that was literally sliding into the sea. But they'd made one crucial mistake. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for my old friend, Sam Cohen. 30 years as a building contractor, licensed in Maine, and most importantly, someone who owed me a favor from the days I catered his daughter's wedding. "Sam, it's Arthur Dubois. I need a professional favor, and I think you're going to find this case very interesting." The sky outside the coffee shop was turning gray, promising rain. A storm was coming to Portland, and with it, the season of reckoning. I had spent 30 years building things that lasted. Now it was time to build something different. A trap so carefully constructed that my dear daughter and her husband would walk right into it, smiling all the way down. That budding idea from the drive solidified as I returned to the motel, ready to strike. Sam Cohen's expertise would be my weapon, but first, I needed ammunition. I pulled out my laptop and began researching Maine's code enforcement procedures. The state website was surprisingly user-friendly. Anonymous complaints could be filed online, triggering mandatory inspections within 72 hours. All I needed was the property address and specific violations to report. I opened a new document and began typing. Soil erosion and foundation instability at 112 Ocean Point Lane. Potential safety hazards noted by multiple residents. Request immediate geotechnical inspection. Report sent. The confirmation email arrived instantly, along with a case number and inspector contact information. My 30 years as a chef had taught me exactly which keywords would trigger urgent attention from health and safety authorities. Outside my window, May drizzle began falling in a fine, persistent mist. The weather matched my mood. Cold, steady, inexorable. I pulled on my coat and drove through the quiet streets toward Ocean Point Lane, curiosity burning in my chest. The inspection van was already there. I parked 2 blocks away and walked back, playing the role of a concerned neighborhood resident. The inspector, a serious-looking woman in a hard hat, was photographing the eroding slope with professional intensity. Her assistant measured settlement patterns with a laser level. Through the front window, I could see Chloe pacing frantically, her phone pressed to her ear. Leo stood behind her, gesturing wildly with his hands. Their body language screamed panic. "Excuse me," I said to the inspector. "Is everything all right with that cottage?" "We've been concerned about safety in the neighborhood." She looked up from her clipboard. "Geotechnical investigation. Can't say more than that, but I'd recommend neighbors keep an eye on any slippage in their own properties." As I walked back to my car, Chloe burst through the front door. "This is harassment," she shouted at the inspector. "Someone's deliberately targeting us." Her voice carried across the cold air, sharp with fear and fury. I smiled, pulling my jacket tighter against the wind. Target number 1 had been hit. That evening, I sat in a coffee shop downtown, laptop open, monitoring my handiwork. The Code Enforcement Department's online portal showed the case status. Active investigation, geotechnical concerns. Confirmed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Who are you and what do you want?" I deleted it without responding. Let them wonder. The next morning brought more rain and more results. I drove past the cottage to find yellow warning tapes stretched across the front entrance. A large notice was posted on the door. Occupancy restricted, pending geotechnical remediation. The crack in the stone patio looked wider in the gray morning light, like justice finally breaking through their careful facade. I thought of Eleanor, of her quiet strength and unwavering sense of right and wrong. She would have been proud of this moment. My phone rang. Sam Cohen. "Arthur, got your message about that property inspection. Fascinating case. I've been consulting with the city inspector. The erosion problems are worse than we initially thought." "How much worse?" "We're talking complete excavation and a new foundation. Minimum cost of $150,000. Cottage is uninhabitable until repairs are completed." I closed my eyes, savoring the mathematics of justice. They'd stolen my $250,000, plus another $75,000 in fraudulent loans. Now they faced $150,000 in mandatory repairs on a cottage they couldn't live in. "Sam, hypothetically speaking, if the current owners defaulted on their mortgage due to these structural issues, what would happen?" "Foreclosure, most likely. Bank would seize the property, sell it at auction to recover their losses. Current owners would lose everything and still owe the difference. Perfect. Absolutely perfect." Through the coffee shop window, I watched tourists with umbrellas hurrying along the cobblestone streets of the old port. Soon, very soon, Chloe and Leo would understand exactly how it felt to lose everything you'd worked for. But they'd also given me an unexpected gift. Their predictable panic was making them sloppy. Time to see just how far they'd go to save themselves. Their panic from the inspection erupted into retaliation, buzzing through my phone that evening. A Facebook notification lit up my screen. "Chloe Dubois tagged you in a post." I opened the app and felt my blood pressure spike. "Please share this warning about my father, Arthur Dubois," the post began. "He has become vindictive and dangerous since we asked him to find his own place. He's been harassing us, filing false reports with the city, and we believe he may be mentally unstable. If you see him around your property or neighborhood, please call the police immediately." The post had 17 shares already, spreading through Portland's social media like wildfire. Comments were pouring in from friends and strangers alike, each one adding fuel to their character assassination campaign. "So sorry you're dealing with this. Elder abuse goes both ways. Stay safe. Has he been evaluated for dementia?" Lies spread like spilled ink on white paper. I scrolled through Chloe's friends list, recognizing names from our past. People who'd eaten at my bistro, who'd congratulated me at her wedding, who'd called me a devoted father. Now they were sharing warnings about my supposed mental deterioration. The next morning, I discovered the campaign had expanded beyond social media. At the bakery, the owner who'd known me for 20 years avoided eye contact. In the fish market, conversation stopped when I entered. At the gas station, a woman actually crossed to the other pump when she saw me approaching. Leo had been busy, too. I found his contribution on a neighborhood watch forum. Dangerous elderly man stalking Ocean Point Lane residents, claims to own property he doesn't, may be suffering from delusions. Approach with caution. But their desperation was showing me something valuable. They understood I was a threat. Real threats don't require fictional warnings. I pulled out my phone and began documenting everything. Screenshots of their posts, photos of the yellow tape on their cottage, copies of the code enforcement reports. Every lie they told online would become evidence of their fraudulent behavior. At the public library, I created new email accounts and began reaching out to their social media supporters with facts, building inspection reports, loan fraud documentation, bank statements showing the forged signatures. Before you share warnings about Arthur Dubois, I wrote, you might want to see the evidence of what his daughter and son-in-law actually did to him. By noon, the narrative was shifting. Comments on Chloe's posts were taking a different tone. Wait, is this the same Chloe who was bragging about her new cottage? Didn't she just post about expensive renovations? Where'd that money come from? This sounds like there's more to the story. I sat in the library watching their online support crumble in real time. The truth, as always, was more compelling than fiction. My phone rang. Chloe's number. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Hello, sweetheart. Dad, we need to talk. Her voice was strained, careful. There's been some misunderstandings. Oh? What kind of misunderstandings? About the cottage? About the money? About everything? Leo and I think we may have overreacted. I smiled, watching rain fall past the library windows. Overreacted to what exactly? To asking you to leave? We were stressed about the cottage payments, and we said things we didn't mean. Maybe we could work something out. The trap was closing exactly as I designed it. Their panic was driving them back to me, the very person they'd betrayed and discarded. I'm listening, I said, though I already knew exactly what I was going to demand in return. Their brewing scheme materialized the next morning with a message lighting up my screen. Chloe's text arrived at 7:43 a.m. Dad, can we meet? There's so much we need to say. Please give us one chance to make this right. I stared at the message while sipping coffee in the motel's cramped breakfast area. The desperation in her words was palpable, even through digital text. After 3 days of declining social media support and mounting evidence of their fraud, they were ready to play their final card. I texted back, neutral location. The Foggy Bean on Commercial Street. 1 hour. The Foggy Bean occupied a corner spot in the old port, its windows fogged with June mist and the warmth of roasting coffee. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a booth near the back where I could watch the entrance. The barista, a young woman with kind eyes, poured coffee without being asked. Chloe appeared first, scanning the room anxiously before spotting me. She wore her best cashmere sweater, the one I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, and carried herself with exaggerated fragility. Leo followed 3 steps behind, his usual swagger replaced by nervous energy. Dad? Chloe slid into the booth across from me, reaching for my hands. I kept them wrapped around my coffee cup. Thank you for agreeing to meet. We miss you so much, she continued, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. The cottage feels empty without you. We realize how terribly we handled everything. Leo nodded vigorously. We were stressed about money, Arthur. You know how it is with a new mortgage, new responsibilities. We said things we didn't mean. I watched them perform their choreographed reconciliation, noting the small tells that betrayed their insincerity. Chloe's eyes darted to Leo whenever she spoke, seeking approval for her script. Leo kept checking his phone as if expecting urgent news that would change their situation. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Come home, Chloe said, tears forming on cue. We'll go back to the original arrangement. Family dinners, shared expenses, everything we promised. And the code enforcement's findings? Leo shifted uncomfortably. That's just bureaucratic nonsense. Minor erosion, nothing that can't be handled with some landscaping. A falsely warm, hug-feeling hollow echoed through my memory. Eleanor's embrace the last time I'd seen her alive, genuine and complete. This performance was its opposite. Calculated, empty, designed to manipulate rather than connect. Interesting, I said, because the inspector's report mentions foundation underpinning, not landscaping. Chloe's composure cracked slightly. Well, maybe it's more serious than we initially thought, but we can work together to fix it. Like a real family. With whose money? The question hung in the air like steam from the espresso machine. Leo leaned forward, his mask slipping further. Look, Arthur, we know you've got resources. We know you're smart enough to solve problems like this. That's why we need you back. There it was, the truth beneath her tears. They didn't want me. They wanted my wallet, again. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, making sure they could see the screen. A recording app was running, red dot blinking steadily. Tell me about the business loan you took out in my name, I said quietly. Chloe went pale. Leo's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. I don't know what you mean, Chloe whispered. 75,000, Atlantic Federal, signed with a perfect forgery of my signature. Ring any bells? Silence fell. The diner's ambient noise conversations, clinking silverware. The hiss of the milk steamer seemed unnaturally loud. Leo reached over and grabbed Chloe's wrist, squeezing until she winced. We need to go, he said, standing abruptly. Sit down, I said, my voice carrying enough authority to stop him mid-rise. We're not finished. But they were already moving, Chloe fumbling for her purse, while Leo threw a 20 on the table. Their carefully planned reconciliation had disintegrated in less than 10 minutes. This isn't over, old man, Leo muttered as they reached the door. I sat alone in the booth, watching them hurry across the cobblestone street through the mist-covered window. The barista approached with a fresh pot of coffee. Everything all right, hun? She asked. Perfect, I replied, stopping the recording and saving it to 3 different cloud accounts. Absolutely perfect. Outside, rain began falling again, each drop settling with the quiet persistence of truth. I pulled out my notebook and added today's date to my timeline, along with detailed notes about their desperate performance. The manipulation attempt had failed completely, but it had given me something even more valuable: recorded evidence of their guilt and a clear demonstration of their continued lies. Time to make their desperation official. Those manipulative echoes faded as I dialed the lawyer, stepping into action. I'd found Evelyn Reed through online reviews, a family law attorney with a reputation for handling complex financial fraud cases. Her office was scheduled for that afternoon. Reed & Associates occupied the second floor of a restored brick building downtown, its windows overlooking the courthouse, where our battle would eventually unfold. Evelyn Reed herself was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Dubois, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk, I've reviewed the materials you sent. This fraud claim is solid, but I want to understand the full scope before we proceed. I opened my briefcase and began laying out evidence, like a chef presenting a multi-course meal. Bank statements showing the forged signatures, geotechnical reports confirming the hidden defects, screenshots of their social media slander campaign, the recorded conversation from the Foggy Bean. They took your life savings as a gift, then fraudulently obtained additional funds using your identity, she summarized, reviewing each document carefully. Meanwhile, they concealed known structural defects that make the property essentially worthless. Correct. And when the defects were exposed, they launched a public campaign claiming I was mentally unstable. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. The financial fraud alone is a federal crime. Add the defamation, and we're looking at substantial damages. What outcome are you seeking? Full restitution. Criminal charges where applicable. And I want them to publicly admit what they did. She smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from anyone in weeks. Mr. Dubois, I believe we can accomplish all of that. But fair warning, family litigation gets ugly. They'll fight dirty. They already have. Filed. The word carried finality as Evelyn's secretary stamped our complaint at the courthouse 3 days later. The case number CV 2025-1847 would become their nightmare and my vindication. Within hours, my phone exploded with messages. Dad, what have you done? Chloe's voicemail was pure panic. We can work this out. Don't destroy our family over a misunderstanding. Leo left his own message, his tone shifting between threats and pleas. This is insane, Arthur. You're going to regret this. We'll countersue for harassment, for elder abuse, for everything. But if you drop this nonsense, we can still fix things. I saved every message, adding them to the growing evidence file. The local newspaper picked up the story. Retired chef sues daughter for financial fraud. The article was brief but accurate, focusing on the unusual nature of family financial crime. Within hours, it was shared across social media, generating dozens of comments from people who'd experienced similar betrayals. Sam Cohen called that evening. Arthur, saw the news. Need any expert testimony about the soil problems? Absolutely. Can you put together a comprehensive report? Already started. This foundation failure is textbook negligence. No way they didn't know about it before the sale. Ms. Albright from the motel volunteered to confirm how she'd obtained the surveyor's preliminary report. My allies were emerging from unexpected places. The case calendar showed our first hearing scheduled for July 15th, 3 weeks away. Use this time to strengthen our evidence, Evelyn advised. Document every interaction, every threat, every attempt at manipulation. They're going to make mistakes, and we want to catch everyone. I spent the following days organizing our evidence into chronological order, creating a timeline that told the story with culinary precision. Each folder was labeled and indexed: financial fraud, property defects, defamation campaign, manipulation attempts. The stack of folders on my motel desk grew daily, each one representing another aspect of their betrayal. But rather than feeling overwhelming, the process felt empowering. Every document was another nail in the coffin of their deception. As June 2025 wound toward its close, I sat reviewing our case briefs one final time. Outside my window, Portland settled into summer quiet, the kind of deep calm that preserves everything exactly as it should be. Soon, very soon, justice would have its day in court. The anticipation from those final preparations carried me to the courthouse steps that crisp July morning. The Cumberland County Courthouse stood against the Maine sky like a monument to justice. Its granite facade caught the first light of what would become the most satisfying day of my life. Evelyn Reed met me at the metal detectors, her briefcase heavy with evidence that would expose every lie Chloe and Leo had told. Behind her, Sam Cohen carried a folder thick with geotechnical reports. Ms. Albright had driven in from the motel wearing her best dress and the determined expression of someone who'd witnessed too much injustice to stay silent. "Ready for this?" Evelyn asked as we climbed the marble steps. "I've been ready since October," I replied. Courtroom 3B filled with a hushed tension that precedes a reckoning. Chloe and Leo sat at the defendant's table, flanked by their attorney, a nervous young man who kept shuffling papers and adjusting his tie. They'd aged in the months since our coffee shop confrontation. Chloe's face was drawn, her usual confidence replaced by hollow-eyed anxiety. Leo slouched in his chair, jaw clenched with the fury of someone whose schemes had finally caught up with him. Judge Patricia Reeves entered with a gravity that 30 years on the bench had earned her. Gray-haired and sharp-eyed, she surveyed the courtroom with the air of someone who'd seen every kind of family betrayal and would tolerate none of it. "This court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The case of Dubois versus Dubois and Hartley." Evelyn's opening statement laid out their crimes with surgical precision: financial fraud, identity theft, defamation, concealment of property defects. Each charge was supported by documents, recordings, and witness testimony that painted a picture of calculated greed. "Your Honor," she concluded, "the defendants didn't just steal money from Mr. Dubois. They stole his trust, his dignity, and his belief in family. Today, we ask this court to restore all three." Their attorney's response was weak, predictable: stress, misunderstandings, family discord blown out of proportion. His arguments crumbled under the weight of evidence like a sandcastle against the tide. The witnesses told the story chronologically. Sam Cohen's expert testimony on the soil defects was devastating. Using enlarged photographs of the eroding slope, he explained how the damage would have been visible during any competent inspection. "In my professional opinion," Sam stated, looking directly at Chloe and Leo, "the previous owners and their real estate agent had to know about these defects. The erosion patterns alone would have been apparent months before the sale. Ms. Albright followed, describing how she'd found the surveyor's report. Her testimony was matter-of-fact, damning in its simplicity. When Chloe took the stand, her carefully rehearsed composure began to fracture under cross-examination. "Mrs. Dubois," Evelyn began, "did you know about the erosion problems before your father provided the down payment?" "We suspected there might be some minor settling issues," Chloe admitted, her voice barely audible. "Minor settling issues that would cost over $150,000 to repair? We didn't know it was that serious." Evelyn produced the surveyor's preliminary report, the one Miss Albright had found. This report is dated 3 weeks before the closing. It clearly identifies major geotechnical concerns. "You received a copy, didn't you?" Chloe's silence stretched until Judge Reeves prompted, "Answer the question, Mrs. Dubois." "Yes," she whispered. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Reeves's gavel brought silence, but the damage was done. Leo's testimony was worse. His arrogance, barely contained throughout the trial, finally boiled over during questioning about the forged loan documents. "Look, the old man wasn't using that credit anyway," he snapped before his attorney could object. "He was just sitting on money while we struggled with real expenses." Judge Reeves's expression could have frozen Casco Bay. The verdict came after less than 2 hours of deliberation. On the charge of financial fraud, Judge Reeves announced, "The court finds for the plaintiff. The defendants are ordered to return the full $250,000 plus the $75,000 fraudulently obtained, with interest." On the charge of defamation, the court finds for the plaintiff. The defendants must issue public apologies on all social media platforms where false statements were made. The gavel struck like thunder. Additionally, this court is referring the matter of identity theft to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. I sat in stunned silence as the numbers added up. Full restitution, public humiliation, criminal charges pending. Everything I'd hoped for and more than I dared expect. As the courtroom emptied, Chloe approached me hesitantly. Tears streamed down her face, real ones this time, not the manufactured emotion from our coffee shop meeting. "Dad," she began, but I held up my hand. "The court has spoken," I said simply. "We have nothing more to discuss." Outside the courthouse, Evelyn shook my hand with genuine warmth. That was one of the most clear-cut fraud cases I've ever seen. They made it easy by being so thoroughly dishonest. Sam clapped me on the shoulder. "Justice served, Arthur. Eleanor would be proud." As I walked to my car, now equipped with an envelope containing copies of all court orders, I noticed something in the distance. A foreclosure sign had appeared in front of 112 Ocean Point Lane. Their dream cottage had become their nightmare, and my nightmare had become my vindication. In the months following the courtroom victory, I rebuilt my days steadily, until one afternoon in September brought an envelope to my new mailbox. I'd purchased a modest condo in the West End, far from Ocean Point Lane, and close to the markets I'd always loved. The balcony was coming along nicely, pots of rosemary and thyme thriving in the autumn sun. The letter arrived. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper that spoke of deliberate thought rather than hasty desperation. My name was written in Chloe's careful script, the same handwriting that had signed thank you cards and birthday wishes for 35 years. I carried it to the balcony, where my morning coffee had become a ritual of peace rather than planning. The harbor stretched across the horizon, sailboats catching the afternoon light. This view was mine, bought with the money they'd been forced to return, plus the substantial damages the court had awarded. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on both sides. Chloe's words came through like a voice from another life. "Dad, we know we have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What we did was unforgivable. We were greedy, stupid, and cruel to the man who sacrificed everything for us." I sipped my coffee, noting how carefully she'd crafted each sentence. This wasn't the desperate scrambling of their earlier attempts. This was calculated humility, designed to achieve a specific outcome. Leo and I have had to start over completely. We lost the cottage, obviously. We're renting a small apartment while we rebuild our credit and our lives. The criminal charges were dropped as part of the restitution agreement, but the civil judgment follows us everywhere. Good, I thought. Let it follow them. We've both found jobs, nothing glamorous. I'm working at a coffee shop. Leo is doing landscaping work. We're learning what it means to actually earn what we have. The next section made me pause. We want you to know that we understand now what we threw away. Not just the money, but the relationship. You were the best father anyone could ask for. And we repaid your love with betrayal. We don't expect forgiveness, but we hope someday you might give us a chance to show we've changed. I set the letter down and walked to the railing, watching the ferries move across the water. The physical labor of my old life helped me think, the way it always had. Chopping, searing, plating, tending to things that grew honestly from good ingredients. Their apology might be genuine. People could change, could learn from consequences, could grow into better versions of themselves. Eleanor had always believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. But forgiveness, I'd learned, didn't require reconciliation. I could forgive them for my own peace without inviting them back into my life. Some bridges, once burned, were better left as ash. The final page contained their real request. We know we have no right to ask, but we're hoping that someday, maybe next year, maybe in 5 years, you might be willing to see us again. Not as family necessarily, but as people who want to make amends. We're starting therapy, both individual and couples counseling. We want to understand how we became the kind of people who could hurt someone who loved us so much. I folded the letter carefully and walked back to my chair. The harbor hadn't moved, hadn't changed. It would be there tomorrow and next year and long after all of us were gone. There was something comforting in that permanence. My phone sat on the table beside my coffee cup. I could call them. I could write back. I could begin the long, difficult process of rebuilding what they destroyed. Or I could simply continue building the life I discovered in their absence. A life of morning coffee and evening sea breezes, of friends who valued honesty, of quiet satisfaction and work well done. I picked up the letter one more time, reading Chloe's final words. We love you, Dad. We know we have no right to that love after what we did, but it's the only true thing in this whole mess. We love you, and we're sorry. The sun was setting behind the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere in town, my daughter and her husband were learning hard lessons about consequence and character. Somewhere else, other families were probably repeating the same ancient dramas of greed and betrayal, love and loss. But here on this balcony in this moment, justice felt complete. I left the letter on the table and went inside to start dinner. Tomorrow I would decide what, if anything, to do with their words. Tonight, I had an herb garden to tend and a quiet home to enjoy. The harbor would still be there in the morning, and so would I. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.